Thank you for joining this Global Investigative Journalism Network webinar, which is about investigating the war in Ukraine, 1 year on. I would like to remind our audience that we have a live interpretation from English to Russian and Ukrainian and back. So if you would like to use those services, please click on the globe button and select the language you prefer. If you can hear and see me well, please put your city name in the chat box, so we know you're here and our audio and video is okay. My name is Olga Simonovich and I am GIJN regional editor. I am originally from Ukraine, and before joining GIJN 5 years ago, I used to work for a national Ukrainian TV channel as a news reporter, screenwriter, producer, and managing editor. Also, I took part in some transborder investigative projects. I will be moderating this webinar today. Our colleague Manisha Ganguly is very sorry that she can't be here with us. Her circumstances have changed at the last moment, and I just jumped in. Nearly 9 years after Russia's annexation of Crimea and 1 year into its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, journalists working on the ground have faced enormous dangers carrying out their work. There is also a lack of information, a tsunami of disinformation, and widespread disruption to the regional independent media. Yet both local investigative journalists and international outlets continue to expose wrongdoing, from war crimes and sanctions busting to corruption by government officials and oligarchs, and to Russian filtration camps. Many of the strongest investigations on the war have come from reporters on the ground, facing some of the most difficult conditions anywhere. Other great stories have relied on open sources, research, and various innovative techniques, such as trade databases and satellite imagery, in addition to using traditional sources, such as witness interviews. In this GIJN webinar, we bring together our four senior investigative journalists who have investigated this war in Ukraine. They will offer tips, tools, and advice on how to cover this particular conflict, but also what they have learned about integrating different investigative methods. I'd like to introduce today's speakers. I will keep my introductions short. Valentina Samar is founder and editor-in-chief of the Crimean Center for Investigative Journalism. After a seizure of the center's equipment by Russian authorities in 2014, she was forced to leave Crimea with her team. She now works in Kyiv investigating violations of human rights and war crimes. Natalia Onysko is co-editor of Ukrainian outlet Nashi Groshi Lviv, an independent non-profit center for investigative journalism. She specialized in investigations of public procurement in Ukraine before the February 2022 invasion, and since has been working on open source investigations into the Russian military. Alessia Marachovskaya is a data reporter and the editor of the data department of iStories, an independent website specializing in large-scale investigations and research. Her areas of interest include corruption, abuse of power by state authorities, the judicial and law enforcement system, and social issues in Russia. Hayley Willis is a visual investigations reporter with the New York Times video team, where she combines the traditional reporting with advanced digital forensics. Previously, she worked with the Human Rights Center at the University of California at Berkeley, and with Amnesty International's Digital Verification Corps. Before we start, a little bit of information about the Global Investigative Journalism Network for those of you not familiar with it. GIJN is the largest global network of non-profit investigative journalism organizations, with 244 member organizations in 90 countries. But it works with journalists everywhere. in nonprofits, in commercial organizations, with freelancers. It has an extensive range of resources and tip sheets to help journalists around the world, which you can check on our website, GIJN.org. And please remember that we are organizing our Global Investigative Journalism Conference this September in Sweden. Don't lose your chance to apply for the fellowships and to send your best investigations for the Global Shining Light Award until the end of February. I would like to remind again our audience that we have live interpretation from English to Russian and Ukrainian and back. So if you would like to use those services, please click on the interpretation button and select the language you prefer. Last but not least, we also want to hear from you in the audience. Please send written questions and messages in Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can. You can start asking questions from now. When the speakers are finished, GIJN's Leonardo Peralta will join us on the screen to moderate the questions. Finally, please note that we will be recording this session for posting later on YouTube. So let's start. Valentina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Olga, for introducing me. Thank you for selecting me as the first speaker of our today's event. I would like to start with sharing the story of this last year of the great war of Russia against Ukraine. Actually, it all started in 2014. It is then that we started to develop those approaches that make it possible for us to work right now at a very high level of quality. So our experience from 2014, when we worked in occupation for almost a year, has taught us that we have to do our best to stay in the Crimea as long as possible. That was our strategy. We worked openly. We worked as TV journalists. We had a website. We did investigations for Ukrainian national TV channels. We provided support to other journalists working in the Crimea. And when on March 1st, 2014, if you could see my slides, you will see how our media center and our editorial was seized by some people with weapons. So after the seizure of media center, the first idea we had was to leave the Crimea, but then we gave it a second thought and we decided to stay and to work and to join our efforts with international journalists. When journalists join their efforts, they are a huge power for the protection of each other and getting the information. We will compete later if we are alive and well. And the second lesson we learned in 2014, something that was useful in 2022, is that in every situation, we have to assess risks and base our decisions on that risk assessment. We need to work with sources because our sources, human sources, are the most valuable thing that we have. So, of course, these sources are necessary for dissemination of information because we need people to know this information. This is the most valuable thing. In August 2014, Russian law enforcement has seized the premises and the equipment that we used. It was another lesson for us. We realized that we could not keep all the eggs in one basket. This is our advice for the journalists. Our production tools should always be in different places. We always need to have some backup to continue our work. Also, we were working in the occupied Crimea. We were investigating international crimes, war crimes, tortures, abductions, and also seizing the property, both private and national Ukrainian property. So all of these skills of investigating war crimes, this is what we were learning since 2014. We're seeing my next slide, and it lists some of the skills that we are using till this day. We are using in our work after the full-scale invasion on February 24th. We have started to work with journalists from the occupied regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia. They lost their jobs, but they had their audiences, people who trusted them, and these were also their sources. These journalists were useful for checking the information we received from other sources, and also some of those journalists joined our team, so we could write about the occupied territories of the South, and thus we are able to provide information to people from real sources. In their communication, each of the journalists, of course, were educated about digital security. We are using as such communication channels as Signal, Messenger, and I was told we have invented this ourselves. People who are in the occupied territories, they are quite numerous. So we buy SIM cards, Ukrainian SIM cards. We register social media accounts, emails, etc. And so these SIM cards are staying in the government-controlled territories, and people are using these accounts in the non-government controlled territories. And in case something dangerous happens, and it does happen, we destroy those accounts immediately. And in this case, people still keep clean cell phones because, you know, in those occupied territories, they can check your gadget at any time. This could be at sunrise, they could stop you in the street, and even if you just signed up for the Telegram channel of an investigative journalist, this could raise suspicion. So there are skills and people need to use the skills. Thanks to the trust we have, the trust of people, we are able to get some unique content. People risk their lives, people risk their freedom to help us create these important special projects, and one of them I'm presenting here to you. In Ukrainian, it is called, well, there can be cotton here, bavovna. This is one of the Ukrainian memes because it's a mistranslation of the Russian word for explosion. They are calling it chlapok. And if we translate chlapok into Ukrainian, we get cotton, bavovna. And this is what we did. Can you please scroll through the slides? I will ask the technical team to support me in this, if possible. Yeah, okay. So please scroll it down for us to see some of the sections in there. So we considered every district of the Crimea. We showed where the military facilities of the Russian Federation are situated. You can click on any of those pieces. So even before the occupation of the Crimea, Russian military bases were not localized, and actually military equipment can be found throughout Crimea, in every big city, in every big port, in the mountains, in the steppes. We have Russian military equipment. This could be legal military targets for the armed forces of Ukraine, but beside those targets, we have our civilian Ukrainians, and to make them safe, we need to inform them about these locations and to stay away from them, because these are legal military targets, and there can be bavovna in any city. So the authors of this project, one of the authors is my deputy editor. He has joined the army, and right now he's injured. And while being treated in the Bundeswehr hospital in Germany, he created this project, and Ukrainians can use it. We used all the possible tools that were available, OSINT, verification of data by people, by human sources. We used satellite imaging, we used maps, and of course, we used our people over there for verification. They were sending in photos and maps. Next slide, please. So this is quite a complicated chart, and let me tell you the story of it. Once I wanted to interview the chief prosecutor of the Crimea, who is currently working in Kiev, and I saw a chart, like a hierarchic chart of the command of the so-called self-defense of Sevastopol, of the Crimea. These are the paramilitary proxies that Russia used to pretend they were not there. You probably remember this quite well. And with the hands of those paramilitaries, Russia was basically occupying the Crimea.
And so I looked at the chart and I saw that it wasn't accurate, it wasn't true. So we decided to go ahead and design something of our own. And we've identified, I think, all of the paramilitaries, and based on those investigations, dozens of criminal proceedings were instituted, and many of the alleged perpetrators were put on the wanted list. Some of them were found, I think, in the Czech Republic and other locations. So the criminals, the collaborators, they are all being wanted, and the intention is to bring them to justice, something that we've been doing since 2014, using the skills that we have, that we are always happy to share with everyone. On this slide, you can see those investigations where we used all of the tools that are available to journalists globally, I believe, identifying people based on the imagery, including the location of the pictures, enhancements of the images, and such. So we are talking all kinds of war crimes, which unfortunately can be found, evidence of which can be found in all Ukrainian cities virtually, the tortures, the abductions, out-of-court executions, civil deportations, looting, and such. So all sorts of war crimes. We're talking all sorts of war crimes, something even that others won't be or wouldn't be looking for. Again, occupational administrations, those who have come here from Russia or who are locals but have been collaborating, including those who have been doing this secretly. And what we've been trying to do is actually reveal those secrets. And that includes property that is quote unquote nationalized to be sold to someone from St. Petersburg or from elsewhere in Russia. So on this
I'm
side, you can
really
see
sorry
the
to
tools.
interrupt you, but we need also time for other speakers. So please tell something like the final phrase you want to share with us, and we'll go forward to Natalia.
Sure, thank you so much. Apologies, got carried away. Anyway, I think you will find plenty of the links in my presentation. I'll just briefly cover what matters the most, the so-called Grain Express, where we had the goal of identifying every link in this criminal chain. And if you're interested, we would be happy to share the details, the skills, the tools regarding in that regard. Thank you so much. Natalia, over to you.
Thank you. Natalia, please, the floor is yours.
So I can go ahead, right? Yes, sure. Okay. Greetings, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm here on behalf of the Regional Investigative Center. We're based in the west of Ukraine, probably one of the safest parts of our country. And a year ago, we were still a center of investigative kind. We were working on corruptions and on state procurement and the tenders. So everything related to assets. And then a year ago, it suddenly became irrelevant altogether. So we had to rewire our operations in a way. So at first, we all became volunteers and we became the sort of a physical hub for those evacuating from Kiev, from farther east, traveling across the western border. Then we were working on the news, on the shelters, bomb shelters in the area, I mean, their list. So we somehow had to keep on going, and we figured that we should be doing what we can do best, which is search for people. And this is how it all started. This is how we engaged in OSINT and that kind of investigation. So the focus of our attention was to actually track down and identify the Russian soldiers. We are not on the front line, unlike our colleagues from Kiev, for example. So we decided to locate those who came down here to occupy our country, to invade us. I think it's a couple dozen pieces that we've produced since then. And so we were processing tons and tons of information, the lists available from the Ukrainian intelligence service, those military units who were present in Ukraine. So we were trying to identify all those people. It was a massive kind of research. And then gradually we would adopt a bit of a different approach. We spoke with the lawyers who would explain us how to better work with this kind of information and how to expose in a way that could be used eventually as part of legal proceedings. And so we moved eventually from this plain identification, this is this and that, gradually to something more comprehensive, including the kind of crime committed, establishing the presence of the respective perpetrator in Ukraine and such. So what I'm saying is that our approach eventually evolved into something else, something bigger. This is what it looked like. This was actually engine translated, so it could be a little off in terms of translation, but this is just for you to get an idea of what it looked like. We were trying to expose the faces of our enemies who came here to Ukraine. Now, onto the tools that we were using and what we've learned. Initially, we worked with different databases, such as the Ukrainian Mirotvorets database or Inform Napalm and such. So at first we would try to process all of this and go into detail, but then eventually we learned that what we were doing tools-wise, I mean, in that respect, the most important tool probably was the Search for Face website, something that you could use when you have photographs of the actual person, and then you could search such websites, the social media, Russian social media, as Vkontakte and Odnoklassniki or Classmates. So, of course, we also used some Telegram bots, something that comes in different shapes and sizes. But Search for Face, I believe, was our central tool. It's actually a great way to find someone based on their photographs. And like I said, we would search the social media. So basically, we would just browse the pages on those social media to find someone specific. Eventually, we realized that there could be a different way to approach this. We know that on those social media, they have what they call private chats or private chat rooms. And so our journalists would register under a made-up name to just collect the data, to monitor what's being said. And those private conversations were quite revealing, I should say, at least at the very beginning. It is a bit different these days. Back in March, no, that was April last year, we were working on a piece where we would find tons of information, like real people using their real names would actually tell where they were going in Ukraine specifically. So we would take that information and then forward it to the special services of Ukraine. Hopefully that was of help, but we don't know for sure. And then in April, so that investigation happened in April, like I said, and in January this year, we had this, say, final piece on those private chat rooms. One of our reporters was who was working on that piece. She had spent quite a considerable amount of time, 9 months, as you can see, in that chat room. And so we should look for the evidence here in Ukraine. And we actually managed to find this photograph on the left, the people sitting on the white sofa. This is Lipivka, a village near Kiev. And this one to the right, this is the same village, the same house, and this is the owner of the house. So this white couch is actually a very prominent detail. And so my colleague who was working on that investigation, she posted this photograph, the one on the left. She posted it on the social media, and the users actually identified the location based on the couch. So thanks to the help of our colleagues from Kiev, we found the owner of the house. He's well and safe, which is great. But he also told us quite a bit about what the occupiers have done to his home. Yeah, and I'll try to wrap up, maybe by saying a few words about another investigation about the drone operators, the Shahed drone operators. Those who were trained in Iran. This is probably the biggest piece that we did where we could do this kind of tracking. If you remember, back then, it was actually a huge threat for us here in Ukraine. So as you can see here, we didn't just find the exact people, but we were the specific individuals, I mean, but we were also able to prove that this is where they had received their training. They spent, I think, I believe, a few weeks at that military base. And again, we were able to collect all of this information from the open sources. Once again, here's the links that we used. And it's really open source, as you can see. I could actually keep on going, but sure, I understand the constraints. So over to who's next.
Thank you. I hope we can go back to it if our audience will be interested to ask questions. And please, Alessia Marachowska, it's your turn. Share your tools and tips, please.
Investigations on reportage and data analysis. So,
hi, Alicia. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think you're not speaking on the English channel. So if you could go there.
Alessia, please make sure that you are choosing the English channel.
Now it's okay?
Yes. Now I can hear
sorry
you.
for that.
Please start again.
Okay, I will start again. So I just said that I'm really, thank you. I'm really glad to be part of this webinar with such a great, brilliant and brave reporters from Ukrainian and US. And I'm working for important stories. This is Russian independent media. We focused on investigations, data analysis, and reportages, but we had to escape from Russia because we were recognized like foreign agent in August 2021 by Stories and 5 employees. And it's a big risk of criminal prosecution. For example, you can have 4 years in the prison. February 22, Important Stories were recognized as an undesirable organization, and this is much more worse position because now you can have 5 years in prison. It was like, you know, before the war, and in February 24, the beginning of Russia's full-scale military aggression against Ukrainian, and we just discussed with our office with my colleagues and our editor-in-chief, Roman Onion. He said that the whole team who was recognized like a foreign agent, me, for example, we need to leave Russia immediately. So March 1st of 2022, Me and some of my colleagues, we leave Russia, but we still continue to work from abroad. And now our main topic we investigate is, of course, war crimes of Russian military in Ukrainian. Also, we're trying to look for assets of Russian elites abroad, so that these assets are under arrest. So maybe some European parliamentarians, they can see our result, so they can use it for sanctions. Also, we making reports from Ukrainian about what activity the Russian military is actually doing. And also, we are searching for hidden supply chains of spare parts to Russia, to the production of weapons and military equipment. And this topic I want to share with you, because the West has banned the sale of components for weapons production to Russia, but Russia is still buying them. And we investigate the one chain of components which Russia used to produce Orlan drones. Orlan drones, it's like, it's like the eyes and ears of the Russian army. They make it possible to detect Ukrainian soldiers and equipment and direct fire at them. The drones can do many other things too, like intercept communication, jam cellular connection, and blast propaganda messages. Some military expert told us, in February 22, Russia had about 1,500 Orlans. So like we figured out, during the war, Russia still was able to buy some components to produce these Orlans. And we found the chain. So St. Petersburg company, Special Technology Center, which makes Orlans. It was created in 2001. And today this company is primarily concerned with Orlans, and like some guy from this company said us, due to the high demands for Orlans, we don't have the resources to do anything else right now. So the need for them is like much greater than can produce. And this company was a Russian receiver. And also this receiver had three intermediary part. Russian intermediary part is SMT iLogic. It's a big supplier. For example, like from January to May 2022, STS purchased about 1.4 billion rubles worth of supplies from SMT Logistic. And lots of components for this company was purchased from USA, China, Switzerland. The Chinese intermediary, it's Asia Pacific Links, has supplied like $12 million worth of components to Russian recipient. And also this company buy these components from USA and Switzerland. And also we found the USA intermediary is IK Tech. So it delivered $2.2 million worth of goods to Russia from 28 to 2021. And more than 19% were orders from SMT iLogic. For example, this US company sell to Russia some special processor modules manufactured by Gumstick. It's the name of company of producer. And precisely this one found in Russia Orlans in Ukrainian, because Ukrainians, they they have access to Russian weapons on the battlefield, so they collect it and research on it. So, and they can understand which components Russia put inside these weapons or Orlans, for example. So this data was crucial part of these investigations, data from Ukrainian side on the companies that make up Russia weapons. So from this data, we could understand which companies exactly was used by Russia. So, and now we can track them and found out this chain. And the second most crucial source of our investigation is custom declaration data. You can buy it on the dark market in websites, but also you can take it from sources. That was our way. So in this declaration data, you can see who sells to whom and what. And how much it was costed. So like this. When you have the names of companies, you can use open information about the owners and directors of this company. For example, we used Spark Interfax, where you can just look at the company page, and you can search the director and owners and who was director and owners in the past. Find these people to reach them and ask them questions. And also open sources about Russian arms manufacturers, their website, because for now, some information that's connected to Ministry of Defense is top secret. Journalists, they cannot have access to it, but still some company, they have websites, and they are proud to say the word that, okay, we produce Orlans and something like that. So we can use it. And based only on these 4 data sources, we were able to find this chain. And also we asked questions to manufacturers, but most of them just aren't told us that we are not responsible for that. But still, we believe that this investigation could help to break this chain, to stop these sailors from China and US to Russia. So, and we believe that it could help stop the producing Orlans. And like I said, it's like eyes and ears of Russian army. So I really hope that they will not able to see and hear anything in the battlefield in this absolutely disgusting war. So, and this investigation was made of my brilliant colleague Maria Zholobova and some colleagues from Reuters as well. So, and we just hope it will make some sense to authorities from China and US to stop this chain, to break this chain. So I'm done, and I'm ready to clear the floor for the next speaker.
And thank you so much for the interesting presentation and for being short and interesting. And please, Hailey Velis, the member of the video investigation team of New York Times. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Olga. I just want to say that it's really great being here. Thanks to GIJN for having me. And it is truly an honor to be on a panel with 3 really fantastic journalists from the region, so whose work I really admire. So thank you so much. I will share my screen. Okay, so I am going to talk through some reporting that my team has done investigating what could amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine, particularly in Bucha, which is a case that I'm sure many here followed, right on the outskirts of Kiev, where Russian troops occupied the town for about a month. And once they pulled out, there was significant evidence that atrocities had taken place while they were there. So just a very brief background on the visual investigations team. We are a team that combines traditional reporting. So that involves doing field work, which for the piece I'm about to talk about, we did some speaking with sources and interviewing witnesses and family members, just like you would for other investigative reporting, but combining that with digital techniques of reporting, what many of my other panelists have already spoken about, OSINT or open source investigations, and using openly available information, especially reporting on cases where, it may be difficult to access, or sources are afraid to speak to you, situations like that. So we've been covering the situation in Ukraine for a while. We also cover a wide variety of topics. So we cover, the American military, we cover policing and protests, but have focused primarily on Ukraine over the past year and a half. And I'm lucky to have several incredible Ukrainian colleagues who work closely with us to do that reporting. So just to talk through some of the work that we did on Bucha, this video, it's slightly graphic, but it's a bit blurry, so hopefully you won't be seeing anything too graphic. This is an example of a video that came out on the internet and was spreading through Telegram and Twitter after Russian forces pulled out of Bucha at the end of March, beginning of April last year. And the video showed people in civilian clothing, at least one of whom had their arms tied behind their back, lying on the street. It's a pretty gruesome video, and immediately as soon as this video came out, there was disinformation about what had happened. So Russia came out and said that this video was fake, that these people were crisis actors, that were, lying in the street for this video to be filmed, that they weren't actually dead. Then they later said that the Ukrainians had killed them, that nobody had been killed while they were controlling the town, essentially saying that none of this is real, which for those of us who have covered Russia, which my team has for a while, not just in the Ukrainian context, but also in regards to Syria and other contexts, it raises some questions. So we wanted to do some reporting to establish whether or not what this video shows is actually legitimate. And we wanted to do it quickly. So we wanted to do it within a day or two to be able to counter the disinformation that was out there. And that meant that we had to use OSINT or open source reporting because we didn't yet have time to go into the field, to speak to people, and to do that very quickly. So the first thing that we did was try to establish that this video was actually in Bucha, which is a common practice in open source investigations. It's called geolocation. So a very simple question: is the video filmed where people say it was filmed? So in this case, we just went to a publicly available resource, Google Maps. There are also other resources. One is called Mapillary, which basically have street view imagery from Ukraine. This is a very sped up version of how we did this because I don't have a lot of time. Of course, it takes a long time to verify this type of footage, but we basically aligned street view imagery from Google Maps with what we see in the video. So here's a good example of that. And that allowed us to establish that this video was in fact filmed in Bucha. So that's the first question, right? Where was it filmed? But then we have another question, and a more important question, which was, when were these people killed? And was it while Russia was in control of the town? Because the Russian Ministry of Defense, who put out a lot of statements on Telegram and other channels, were saying that nobody suffered violent action while they were in control of Bucha. And they also mentioned that they withdrew from Bucha on March 30th. So they gave us an exact date at which they left the town and said that before March 30th, nothing violent happened to anyone, which gives us a claim to test, right? Whether or not that's true. So to do that, we had to establish when those people had been killed. And the resource we used for that was satellite imagery, which several of my panelists have also already spoken about. So in this case, we went to Maxar, a satellite imagery company, who we work with frequently, and requested images of Bucha for us to do analysis of on our end. This is an example of one of those images, and this is an image from the exact street from the video that you just saw. And these were images taken throughout the month of March, so while Russia was in control of the town. And looking at the images, we saw in this image, it looks like essentially black spots on the street, but what we were hypothesizing were actually those people who had been killed. And the notable thing was that those black spots appeared while Russia was in control of the town, were not there prior, and were seen for weeks. So, you know, as early as March 5th, and leading over the next few weeks. And as Russia said themselves, they didn't pull out until March 30th. So these people were appearing on the street throughout the time of the occupation. Here's another close look at the before and after. So the first image is from February 28th, prior to Russian occupation, and the second image is from March 19th. And again, this is while Russia was in control of the town. But we still have to confirm that these are in fact bodies. Of course, the image is not incredibly clear, and it's possible that, you know, maybe these are burn marks from artillery or from fighting. And so to do that, we corroborate between various visual sources. So in this case, we essentially did a side-by-side of the video, which I showed you earlier, and the satellite imagery, matching visual features to establish that each of these spots was in fact a person, and they were lying in the exact same positions for, you know, nearly a month, which clearly tells us that these people are not crisis actors. They were in fact killed, and they were in fact killed while Russia was in control of the town. So Russia's statement that there was no violent action in Bucha while they were in control is unequivocally false. We did this, and my colleague Malachy Brown really led a lot of the reporting in only a few days, and published what was a very short story, essentially saying that the Russian claims were not true, and including the information that I just showed you. Now, it's important to point out that what this investigation didn't answer is how these people died, exactly how they died, who exactly killed them, and also who they were. And those were questions that we felt it would be really important to continue to answer after we put out this short piece kind of countering the disinformation. So we then continued to report on Bucha for nearly 8 months. Two colleagues of mine, Yusra Alhlu and Masha Frodiak, who is Ukrainian, spent weeks, months reporting on the ground in Bucha, and myself and several of my colleagues on the visual investigations team continued to report from New York to answer those questions. So who exactly were these people? You know, we wanted to give them a name, we wanted to give them faces and not have, you know, their death be the only thing they were known for, but also to report really on the accountability aspect of this, you know, for these crimes to make their way to international courts. You can't just say that the Russians did it. You know, we wanted to be able to say the units that were involved, the commanders that were involved, in hopes, you know, for future accountability. So the investigation really started. We focused in on that one street in Bucha because, you know, over 400 people were killed there, and we had to kind of, you know, focus our investigation. We mapped out every single place where somebody had been killed, and that was basically what we focused our investigation on. So in every single one of these cases that you see on this map here, who was killed and who killed them. And to do that, we, and these are the investigations that came out of it, a 30-minute documentary, which is the evidence of the unit that was involved, the 234th Air Assault Regiment of the Russian military. And then this piece, a separate piece, which is identifying all of the victims, speaking to their family members and showing who they were. To report out these stories, I'll just show a very quick example of one of many forms of evidence that we used, and how important it was to be both in the field and doing the OSINT reporting in this case. So our field reporters obviously were going around speaking to people, interviewing witnesses, but they were also collecting CCTV footage from homes in the area. And that CCTV footage we were later able to analyze back in New York. And in that footage, we saw that the Russian soldiers were frequently trying to cover up identifying markings on their vehicles. But we found 4 vehicles where they did not do that very well and were able to identify the numbers and markings on the vehicles. And as a result of that, we then looked through essentially hours and hours and hours of archival footage of Russian military exercises, military exercise videos published by the Russian military themselves, by Russian state media, to identify the exact same vehicles seen previously in Belarus, some of which we found at the border in Belarus back in February 2022, right before they were deployed into Ukraine, to identify the exact vehicles that we saw in Bucha. And that led us to the units. So then we were able to investigate which units these vehicles belong to, and all of these vehicles belong to the same unit, the 234th Air Assault Regiment. So that's an example of the field work and the open source work and how it came together to answer the questions that we had about what had happened here. And you can watch the full documentary to see more of that evidence, which includes a lot of the techniques, again, my other panelists spoke about in terms of identifying people, Telegram bots, all of those things. And I also would really encourage you to read the piece identifying the victims. I will stop there so we have time for questions. But thank you so much. And that's my contact information. Anyone should feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the amazing and helpful presentation. And I'd like to ask Leo to join us with the questions from our audience.
Yes, hi Olga, thank you. And first of all, thank you to all our speakers for finding the time to talk to us about your work. It's so important. It's really hard to find the right words to express. So the first question will be to Natalia and Valentina, since unfortunately we didn't have enough time to go through your whole presentations. If you have any tools or any tips that you would like to share with the audience, things that you use every day or you think are particularly important for the audience to know, and if they are connected to your slides, please also let us know so we can tell the technical team to help you sharing the screen. Valentina, if you would like to go first.
Пані Валентино, будь ласка. Yes, I will not be going back to the slides. I just wanted to quickly thank everyone for their presentations, for the work that you are doing. And a special thank you to goes out to the Russian reporters. I can appreciate the meaning of their effort, especially these days, myself coming from the Crimea. So we're basically talking about making our investigations as effective as possible. And I think it was Alessia who mentioned about the producers shipping, despite the sanctions, for to make it possible to produce those Russian drones or LUNs. And I'm afraid that Russia can really, well, unfortunately, they have the capacity and the means to actually do this despite the sanctions. They're poorly developed themselves as an economy in this respect, but they do have access to those other supplies. So it is critical to ensure that secondary sanctions apply as well, involving the producers from other countries. And we've worked together quite a bit on the Crimean sanctions. So maybe I would encourage my colleagues to join me in this effort as well, so that together we could make it as effective as possible. Thank you so much. Now, regarding the sources, from our experience, if we're talking about OSINT and Russian military identification, we didn't really make any new discoveries. Well, at least I don't think so. We would use all the same sources as the other investigators. When we were doing that kind of work, we would process many Russian channels as sources of information when we needed to identify someone. I mean, the submarines, the planes, and such. I don't think there's anything in particular. You just need to be attentive to detail.
Thank you, Natalia. So actually, to go further into this, and this can apply to all the speakers, do you have any tips for the audience on how to use social media to investigate while protecting yourself? Like, I don't know, do you need to create fake accounts, or is there any other tips that you would like to share with us? And yes, this is all to all of you.
Well, in terms of what we have been using, first of all, that would be a VPN, because we have no direct access to the Russian social media from Ukraine. And so our colleague who would monitor those private chats, so absolutely she had a fake account. I mean, she would register. She actually had a Russian registration. So she had people who could help her do that. And of course, she had a different picture in her profile and stuff, because otherwise it would be just impossible to access that kind of information. And her real details, of course, they were concealed. And same goes for the bots that we are using. We're not using our actual phone numbers. We're using VPNs as well. If I could contribute as well, on slide 6 of my presentation, you can see at the very bottom the information about the services that you could use to help you protect your identification. That includes not just the VPNs, but also there are services that you could use to bypass the engines that could identify you. So there are tools that help you do that. There are websites that help you do that, to do this anonymously. You could get a one-time phone number, for example, to dial in or to use for text messaging to connect with the interface. You could also use a one-time mailbox, for example. I personally didn't use this, but I know that one of my colleagues does use it because this colleague deals with sensitive information. But you can see all of this on my slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Haley, is there anything else you would like to mention?
I agree with everything that was said. Definitely using a VPN for your research. Similarly, we're limited by things we can access from the US as well. For example, we're unable to access the Russian Ministry of Defense website unless we are using a Russian VPN. So for collecting some of that archival material I was talking about, a VPN was necessary. And also, of course, it protects your IP address. Proton VPN is a good option, which has a free version. And yes, also in terms of, joining Telegram channels, things like that, if, there are some pretty cheap burner phones. If you get like a very, very old iPhone, you can get that for pretty affordable. And it can be a separate phone number from your personal phone number for joining Telegram groups or using kind of more sensitive where you want to not have your personal phone number attached. So just seconding what else was already said.
Thank you. Alessia and Valentina, do you want to add anything to this?
I think my colleagues completely closed this topic.
Okay, thank you. So Alessia, while I have you here, somebody from the audience is asking, how do you find sources, people who are ready to provide you any information? And also, while you talk about this, obviously when you're talking to people in these areas, they've suffered very traumatic experiences. So how do you manage, how do you ensure that you don't re-traumatize them or you don't make things worse?
About the sources, if you mean the sources who gave us text declaration, it's they found us. So that's how it works. So if you will try to find some sources who will give you some secret information, I think you will fail. But if you have a reputation or something like that, so and the sources will be sure that you will use these documents right. So they found you, they will find you. That's what happened. What about talking to the people from occupied area, victims of Russian invasion? Of course, it's a really hard, especially for Russian media. You can imagine how it's now to speak with Russians, even if we try to explain our position and something like that. But lots of Ukrainians, they ready speak with us, share with us, and of course it's a really hard job to make this conversation right, not traumatize people again. So it's like you have to be really, really careful with people, and just you human feelings. You know that you have to protect these people. You have to give them opportunity to discover what crimes Russian army have done, and you like take responsibility to take this position and show it to the world, to the Russian audience, because lots of our audience is Russians, and we try always, every day, we're trying to show them what is going on, really, not like propaganda said in Russia. And actually, sometimes it works, because we've got lots of comments from the people who was like, oh, I watched TV and I was really thinking, I was thought that like it's not Russian fault at all, but now I changed my mind. I changed my mind direction. So step by step it works, but yes, you need to be really, really careful with heroes from Ukraine.
And do you have also any tips on how to protect them while they're sharing information with you? Because obviously they're putting themselves at risk.
Yeah, it depends on each situation, because sometimes people, they are in the safe space and they are ready to share their faces, their names, and all the details. But sometimes they are staying in occupied zone or they're not feeling safe anymore. So we make them anonymous. We just change the names. And we just looking very precisely on details which they gave us. So, and we just try to, put it away if some details could be used to recognize these people. So we just try to make them anonymously, but we try to save their story, the main story.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we only have time for one last question. So again, this is for all the panelists. The audience is wondering if they would like to clarify if investigators communicate with any international bodies present in Ukraine that collect evidence on war crimes and crimes against humanity, genocide, etc. And if yes, do you have any results of such communication So Haley, if you would like to go first.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually come from a human rights background originally, and in my previous job did work on some legal proceedings regarding international humanitarian law. So I know the landscape quite well. It's something that several of us on the team have backgrounds in, which is why if you watch the investigation, we kind of look at it from a legal standpoint. So building up evidence that could potentially stand up in a court of law if you were trying for war crimes or crimes against humanity, pointing to specific actors who were involved, pointing up the chain to commanders who were involved. In terms of actually working with these entities, and we have to maintain our independence to some degree. So we don't directly work with people in terms of sharing information. But we try to be as transparent as we can be when publicly putting our data out there. There are still conversations we're having about if we can put out more data from the investigation while still, protecting our sources, of course, which is of the primary concern. And then, we've been reached out to, for example, by people who work for the Institute for International Investigations, which is a training program for investigators at the ICC. And they asked, can we train people using your investigation and using your work? And obviously that's something that we support and want the work to be used for. So it's certainly something that we keep in mind in terms of direct cooperation. There are limitations, but ideally the work will lead to some accountability, and that's a place where that can happen.
Thank you, Haley. Natalia, would you like to add anything to this?
We don't have direct cooperation with any of such agencies either, but of course we would be happy to share all the information that we can if there's a need. We're definitely trying to handle our research and our investigations in a manner that would be helpful for prosecution eventually. Regarding those Shaheeds, the drones and their operators, I believe that criminal proceedings were actually instituted, and information was collected on top of that, so that the whole bulk of it could be used for international prosecution. And this is, I guess, the first of this kind, this kind of experience that we had. I could go on and on about this, considering that we've been doing this since 2014. Well, when it comes to law enforcement in Ukraine and the cooperation with the ICC and the investigation of and into war crimes and crimes of aggression against humanity, crime of genocide, it actually has been happening all this time, all these years, and I can definitely say that we already have plenty of cases that were forwarded to the ICC. And in each of those cases, you will find something investigated by us. After February 24, we've been, say, in close touch with the prosecution, especially in terms of setting up those bodies that would investigate the war crimes. They would rely on our investigations, plus the human rights advocates and lawyers who were engaged in awareness raising. And we also took part in the trainings about how to raise awareness, about how to investigate these kinds of crimes. And after the invasion, the Ukraine 5 AM coalition was formed, and we've also been in cooperation with them, helping the journalists investigate and handle these crimes in line with the applicable standards, including in terms of documenting these crimes so that they could be used later on. that evidence, I mean, by the prosecution internationally, because you need to know how to handle it in a certain manner when you interview the victims, their families, when you actually document the crime, the scene, and things like that. So there's a lot to consider, and as journalists, we can contribute a lot as long as we remain autonomous from the state bodies. Because in terms of direct cooperation, we are not engaged directly with any designated agency. We just do our, say, journalism, trying to keep it relevant, and we're always ready to cooperate. We do not go into the courtroom as witnesses, because if we do, we will simply have no time to do the journalism. So what we do instead is share the information that we have, the results of our investigations, while trying to stay out of the proceedings themselves. But again, this is a huge body of work that needs to be done right.
Thank you, Valentina. I really appreciate it. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Before we close, I would like to thank GIJN and our audience today. And a very big thank you to our speakers, Valentina, Natalia, Alessia, and Haley. And I know we got a lot of questions about speakers' presentations. We will share them in the description for the YouTube video. So please join GIJN video channel, and also be sure to watch GIJN's Twitter feed and website for details on future events. Once again, thank you all, and goodbye.